Standing at the altar in a wedding dress she never chose, Stephanie Varelli is 30 seconds from marrying the most dangerous man she's ever loved, the same man her crime-lord father handpicked to own her future. Weeks ago, she thought she'd escaped to Barcelona. She was wrong. One phone call dragged her back. One lie shattered everything. And the man waiting at the end of that aisle? He was never a coincidence. This is a story about power, betrayal, and the brutal choice between freedom and love. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The dress weighed more than Stephanie expected. Not the fabric, though there was enough tulle and silk to drown in, but the meaning. Every stitch, every pearl sewn into the bodice, every meter of train dragging behind her felt like a chain. She stood in the bridal suite of her father's Manhattan estate, staring at herself in a floor-length mirror, and didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her hair was pulled into an elegant updo she hadn't asked for. Her makeup was flawless, in a way that made her look like someone else's bride. The dress fit perfectly because it had been made for her body without her input. Everything about this moment had been decided without her. "You look beautiful, Bambina." Stephanie's jaw tightened. She didn't turn. She knew the voice. Adriano Varelli stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair slicked back and a suit that cost more than most people's cars. He looked every bit the successful businessman he pretended to be. But Stephanie knew better. She'd known better since she was 12 years old and first understood what her father really did for a living. "Don't call me that," she said quietly. Adriano's expression didn't change. He crossed the room slowly, hands in his pockets, and stopped a few feet behind her. Their eyes met in the mirror. "Today is an important day," he said. "For you, for our family." "For your business, you mean?" His smile was thin. "Same thing." Stephanie turned to face him. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight gray in his stubble. He looked older than she remembered. Or maybe she just hadn't looked at him properly in years. "I'm not doing this," she said. Adriano sighed like she'd just told him the sky was blue. "Yes, you are." "I don't love him." "You will." "That's not how it works." "Stephanie," his voice hardened, "you've had your freedom. You've had your little adventures. Zurich, Barcelona, running around like a college student with no responsibilities. That's over now." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "You don't get to decide that. I'm your father. You're a criminal." The word hung in the air between them. For a moment, Adriano's face went very still. Then he stepped closer, and Stephanie fought the instinct to step back. "Everything I've done," he said quietly, "has been to protect you, to give you a life most people can't even imagine. And this marriage, this alliance, is part of that protection." "Protection from what?" "From the world we live in, from the people who would use you to get to me, from yourself." He reached out and adjusted the thin veil pinned into her hair. "Ruben de Castro is a good man, powerful, smart. He'll take care of you." "I don't need anyone to take care of me." "Everyone needs someone, Bambina. You'll see that eventually." Stephanie wanted to scream. She wanted to rip the veil off her head and tear the dress to pieces. But she'd learned a long time ago that anger didn't work with her father. He absorbed it, redirected it, made it meaningless. So instead, she looked him straight in the eye and said, "I met him in Barcelona." Adriano paused. "I know." "You knew?" "Of course I knew. You think I'd let my daughter wander around Europe without keeping an eye on her?" He smiled faintly. "Ruben was there because I asked him to be." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "He was supposed to watch over you, make sure you were safe. I didn't tell him to get involved with you." Adriano's tone was almost amused. "That part, he chose himself." Stephanie felt the blood drain from her face. "You're lying." "I don't lie to you, Stephanie. I've never lied to you." "You've done nothing but lie to me," her voice cracked, louder than she intended. Adriano's eyes flicked toward the door, checking if anyone had heard, then back to her. "Lower your voice," he said calmly. "No." "Stephanie, no. You set me up. You sent him to Barcelona. You let me think I was free. You let me think I was falling for someone real. It was real. She stopped mid-breath. Adriano's expression softened, just slightly. He wasn't supposed to care about you, but he does. That's why this works. You already love him. Now you'll marry him, and everyone wins. Stephanie stared at her father, and for the first time in her life, she felt something close to hatred settle in her chest like a stone. I'll never forgive you for this, she whispered. Adriano nodded slowly. I know. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Don't be late. Then he was gone. Stephanie stood alone in the bridal suite, breathing hard, her hands shaking. She looked at herself in the mirror again, this stranger in white, and felt something inside her crack open. She'd tried running once. It hadn't worked, but maybe there was another way. Bochok. 3 weeks earlier, Barcelona Stefani Varelli sat in a corner booth of a cafe near Las Ramblas, nursing a cortado and pretending to read a book she wasn't absorbing. The sun was warm on her shoulders. The city hummed with life around her. Tourists taking photos, street performers juggling, vendors shouting in Catalan. It was chaotic and beautiful and nothing like home. She loved it. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Zurich had been a mistake. Too cold, too quiet, too full of bankers who reminded her of her father's associates. But Barcelona? Barcelona was noise and color and anonymity. Here, she was just another 26-year-old woman drinking coffee and trying to figure out her life. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and felt her stomach tighten. Dad. We need to talk. Call me. She silenced the phone and shoved it into her bag. Not today. She'd left New York 6 months ago with one suitcase, a new passport her father didn't know about, and enough cash to last a year if she was careful. She hadn't told anyone where she was going, not her mother, not her younger brother, not the security detail that followed her everywhere at home. She'd just left. At first, she'd been terrified. Every stranger on the street looked like one of her father's men. Every knock on her hostel door made her heart race. But weeks passed, then months, and no one came. Eventually, she started to believe she'd actually done it. She'd escaped. Stephanie finished her coffee, paid the bill, and stepped out into the afternoon heat. She had a shift at a bookstore in an hour, her first real job, the kind where she had to show up on time and smile at customers and earn her paycheck. It was humbling and exhausting, and she loved every second of it. She was halfway down the street when she felt it. That prickle on the back of her neck. The sense that someone was watching. She stopped walking and turned slowly, scanning the crowd. Tourists, locals, a street artist painting portraits, a man in a linen shirt reading a newspaper at a cafe table. Nothing unusual. She shook her head and kept walking. Paranoia. You're fine, but the feeling didn't go away. That night, Stephanie met her roommate Clara at a club in El Raval. It wasn't the kind of place she would have gone to back in New York. Too loud, too crowded, too much cheap tequila. But that was exactly why she liked it now. No one here cared who her father was. Clara was dancing with a guy she'd met 5 minutes ago. Stephanie leaned against the bar, sipping a gin and tonic, watching the lights pulse across the dance floor. And then she saw him. He was standing near the DJ booth talking to someone Stefani couldn't see. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans that fit well enough to notice. He had the kind of face that belonged in old European films, sharp jawline, strong nose, eyes that didn't miss anything. He turned, and for a split second, their eyes met. Stephanie looked away quickly, heart hammering. Stop it! He's just a guy! But when she glanced back, he was still looking at her. This time he smiled. It wasn't a sleazy smile. It wasn't even flirtatious. It was knowing. Like he'd seen something in her that no one else had. Stephanie set her drink down and pushed through the crowd toward the exit. She didn't know why. Instinct, maybe, or fear, or the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like her father's. Trust no one. Outside, the air was cooler. She walked quickly, aiming for the nearest metro station. Hey! She spun around. The man from the club was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking entirely too calm for someone who'd just followed a stranger into the street. Relax, he said in English, his accent faint but European. I'm not going to hurt you. Then why are you following me? I wasn't. I was leaving. You happened to walk in the same direction. Stephanie crossed her arms. Bullshit. He smiled again, slower this time. Okay, maybe a little bullshit. Despite herself, she almost laughed. Almost. What do you want? She asked. To buy you a drink. I already had a drink. Then to walk you home. I don't need an escort. Didn't say you did. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. But it's late. And this neighborhood isn't great after midnight. Humor me. Stephanie should have said no. Should have turned and walked away. Should have done literally anything except what she did next. Fine, she said. But if you try anything, I'll scream loud enough to wake half the city. Noted. They walked in silence for a block. Then another. The streets were quieter here, the buildings older, graffiti sprawling across shuttered storefronts. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated. Anna. He didn't call her out on the lie. I'm Ruben. Where are you from, Ruben? Here and there? You? Same. He laughed softly. Fair enough. They reached her building, a narrow 5-story walk-up with peeling paint and a broken intercom. Stephanie stopped at the door and turned to face him. This is me. Nice place. It's a dump. I've seen worse. She studied him for a moment, this stranger who'd followed her out of a club and somehow didn't feel dangerous. Why did you really follow me? Ruben's smile faded. For the first time, he looked serious. Because you looked like you were running from something. And I know what that feels like. Stephanie's breath caught. Good night, Anna, he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away, hands still in his pockets, disappearing into the dark. She stood there for a long time before she finally went inside. She saw him again 2 days later. This time, it wasn't a coincidence. He was sitting at the same cafe where she'd been reading, drinking an espresso, and doing a crossword puzzle like he had all the time in the world. Stephanie stopped in her tracks. He looked up, saw her, and waved her over. Against every ounce of common sense she had left, she sat down. You're following me, she said flatly. I'm not. I come here every Wednesday. It's Thursday. Then I'm early. He set the crossword aside. Coffee? I'm working. At the bookstore, I know. Her stomach dropped. How? I asked around. Small neighborhood, people talk. He leaned back in his chair, completely unbothered. Don't worry, I'm not a stalker. That's exactly what a stalker would say. Fair point. He pushed the menu toward her. Sit. Have a coffee. If I do anything weird, you leave. Deal? Stephanie should have left right then. Should have told him to stay away from her. Should have called the police. But she didn't. She sat down and ordered a cortado. And that was how it started. Over the next week, Ruben became part of her routine. They met for coffee, walked through Parque de la Ciutadella, ate tapas at a hole-in-the-wall place he knew that didn't have a name on the door. He didn't ask invasive questions, didn't push, didn't try to kiss her. He just existed, steady, calm, present. And Stephanie, who'd spent her entire life surrounded by men who wanted something from her, didn't know what to do with that. Why are you really here? She asked one night. They were sitting on a bench near the beach, watching the waves crash under a half moon. Ruben didn't answer right away. I told you, I'm between things. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. She turned to look at him. Are you in trouble? Define trouble. Ruben. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Let's just say I've made some choices that didn't sit well with certain people. And I needed space to figure out my next move. That's incredibly vague. I know. Are you dangerous? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. Not to you. Stephanie wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it scared her. I'm not who you think I am, she said quietly. I know. Her heart stopped. What? Your name isn't Anna. You're not just some girl working at a bookstore, and you're definitely not from here and there. He smiled faintly. But I don't care. Whatever you're running from, it's your business, not mine. Stephanie felt something crack open in her chest. Why are you being so nice to me? Because you deserve it. It was such a simple answer, such a stupid, earnest, impossible answer, and it broke her. She kissed him. It was impulsive and messy and probably a terrible idea, but she didn't care. She kissed him like she was drowning and he was air, and when he kissed her back, slowly, carefully, like she was something precious, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. When they finally pulled apart, Reuben rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "We should probably talk about this." "Later," Stephanie said. "Later," he agreed. And for one perfect, fragile moment, the world felt like it might actually be okay. Book. 3 days later, everything fell apart. Stephanie was closing up the bookstore when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. She'd been ignoring her father's calls for weeks. But something made her look at the screen. Unknown number, she answered. "Hello?" "Stefani." Her blood turned to ice. "Marco?" Marco Santini was her father's right-hand man. Cold, efficient, terrifying. "Your father wants you home," Marco said. No preamble, no warmth. "I'm not coming home." "Yes, you are." "You can't make me." There was a pause. Then Marco said very quietly, "We have your brother." Stephanie's knees buckled. She grabbed the counter to steady herself. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Let me talk to him." Another pause. Then a younger voice, shaking with fear. "Steph?" "Luca?" Her throat closed. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" I'm fine. Dad just wants you to come home. Please, Steph, just come home." The line went dead. Stephanie stood there in the empty bookstore, shaking, her mind racing. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But she knew her father, knew what he was capable of. She grabbed her bag and ran. Reuben found her an hour later, sitting on the beach with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the ocean. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside her and waited. "I have to go back," she said finally. "To New York?" She nodded. "Why?" "Because if I don't, my father will hurt my brother." Her voice cracked. "And it'll be my fault." Reuben was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if I told you I could help?" Stephanie turned to look at him. "What?" "Your father, the people he works with. I know them. I know how they operate." He hesitated. "I can protect you." "How?" "Trust me." "I don't even know you." "Yes, you do." He reached out and took her hand. "You know me better than most people ever will, and I'm asking you to trust me anyway." Stephanie looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. There was something in his eyes, something steady and certain and real. "Okay," she whispered, and just like that, she made the worst decision of her life. 2 days later, Stephanie landed in New York. Marco was waiting at the airport, flanked by 2 men she didn't recognize. They didn't speak, just escorted her to a black SUV and drove her straight to her father's estate. Adriano was waiting in his study. "Welcome home, Bambina," he said. Stephanie didn't sit. "Where's Luca?" "At school, where he's supposed to be." "You said—" "I said we have him. I didn't say we hurt him." Adriano poured himself a scotch. "He's fine. He's safe. And he'll stay that way as long as you cooperate." "Cooperate with what?" Adriano set the glass down and looked at her. "You're getting married." Stephanie laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are. In 3 weeks. To Reuben de Castro." The floor dropped out from under her. "What?" "It's already arranged. His family and ours have been discussing it for months. You'll marry him, unite our organizations, and— Are you insane?" Stephanie's voice rose. "I'm not marrying some— You already know him." She froze. Adriano smiled faintly. "Did you really think Barcelona was an accident, Stephanie? That you just happened to meet the heir to one of the most powerful families in Europe?" He shook his head. "I sent him there to keep an eye on you, to make sure you were safe. The rest, well, that was his idea." Stephanie felt the room spin. "You're lying. Ask him yourself. He'll be here tomorrow for dinner." "No." "Stephanie, no." She turned and ran. She made it as far as the driveway before Marco's men grabbed her. Totik. The next evening, Stephanie sat at her father's dining table in a dress she hadn't chosen, across from a man she thought she knew. Ruben de Castro looked exactly the same dark eyes, same calm expression, same steady presence. But now she knew the truth. He was never hers. Stefani, he said quietly. She didn't look at him, didn't speak, just stared at her untouched plate and tried not to scream. Adriano cleared his throat. Ruben, why don't you tell Stephanie about the wedding plans? I'd rather talk to her alone, Ruben said. Adriano frowned. That's not, please. There was something in Ruben's voice, not quite a command, but close, that made Adriano pause. Finally, he nodded and stood. 10 minutes. The door closed behind him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ruben said, I didn't know. Stephanie's head snapped up. What? When I met you in Barcelona, I didn't know you were Adriano's daughter. He told me to watch over someone. He didn't tell me who. Ruben leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. I swear to you, Stephanie, I didn't know. But you know now. Yes. And you're still going through with it. Ruben's jaw tightened. It's complicated. It's not. Stephanie stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You lied to me. You used me. And now you're going to marry me because my father told you to. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Ruben? Explain it to me. Make it make sense. He stood too, facing her across the table. I care about you. Don't. I do. More than I should. More than I meant to. He took a step closer. And I know you don't believe me right now, but everything between us in Barcelona, everything, that was real. Stephanie felt tears prick her eyes. She hated herself for it. Get out! Stephanie, get out. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the door. But before he left, he stopped and looked back. I'll find a way to fix this, he said. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. And then he was gone. Stephanie stood alone in the dining room, her hands shaking, her heart breaking, and knew with absolute certainty that she was trapped. The wedding was in 3 weeks, and there was no way out. Stephanie didn't sleep that night. She lay in her childhood bedroom, redecorated since she'd left, all traces of her teenage self erased and replaced with cream walls and tasteful furniture, and stared at the ceiling until the sky outside turned gray. At 6 a.m, she gave up. She pulled on running clothes and slipped out of the house before the security detail stationed outside her door could stop her. She made it 3 blocks before a black sedan pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. Marco leaned out, sunglasses on despite the early hour. Get in. I'm going for a run. No, you're not. You can't keep me locked up like a prisoner. Yes, I can. He opened the door. Get in, Stephanie. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She wanted to run, wanted to scream at him, punch him, do something, anything, to take back even a shred of control. But Marco had a gun under his jacket. She'd seen it, and she knew he'd use it if her father gave the order. So she got in. Marco drove her back to the estate in silence. When they pulled up to the front gate, he finally spoke. Your father's trying to protect you. You know that, right? Stephanie didn't answer. He loves you, Stephanie, in his own way. She turned to look at him. Did he send you to say that? Marco's mouth twitched, almost a smile. No, that one's for me. Well, thanks for the sentiment. It doesn't change anything. Didn't think it would. She climbed out of the car and walked back into the house, every step feeling heavier than the last. And checked. Breakfast was waiting for her in the dining room. Eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, coffee in a silver carafe. Her mother sat at the head of the table, reading the Times on her tablet, looking immaculate in a silk blouse and pearls. Elena Varelli glanced up as Stefani entered. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. I'm not surprised. Elena set the tablet aside. Sit. Eat. Stephanie sat. She didn't eat. Her mother poured coffee for both of them with the kind of practiced grace that came from decades of playing the role of Mafia wife. Elena had been born into this world, daughter of a capo, granddaughter of a boss, and she wore it like a second skin. Poised, elegant, unshakable. Stephanie had spent her entire life trying not to become her. Your father told me about Barcelona, Elena said after a moment. Stephanie's hand tightened around her coffee cup. Of course he did. He said you've been difficult. He sent men to drag me back here. What did he expect? Elena's expression didn't change. He expected you to understand that this marriage is good for you. Good for me? Or good for him? Both. Elena took a delicate sip of her coffee. Ruben de Castro is a smart match, Stephanie. Powerful family, legitimate businesses. He's not like the men your father usually associates with. He lied to me. He protected you. That's not the same thing. Elena set her cup down with a soft clink. When I married your father, I was 19 years old. I barely knew him. My parents arranged it, just like this. And I was furious. She paused. But I learned to love him. And more importantly, I learned that love isn't the foundation of a marriage like ours. Respect is, trust is, partnership. I don't want a partnership. I want a choice. You had your choice. You chose to run. Elena's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. And look where it got you. Stephanie stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. I can't do this. Yes, you can. You're stronger than you think. I'm not you, Mom. Elena looked at her for a long moment. No, you're not. You're softer, more idealistic. You still think the world owes you fairness. She stood as well, smoothing her blouse. But you'll learn, just like I did. Stephanie left the dining room before her mother could see her cry. The wedding preparations began that afternoon. A team of planners descended on the estate, turning the ballroom into a staging ground for what her father kept calling the event of the year. Floral arrangements, seating charts, menu tastings, every detail orchestrated down to the second. Stephanie was paraded through it all like a mannequin. Stand here. Smile. Approve this. Choose between these two nearly identical shades of ivory. She went through the motions, numb. At one point, the wedding planner, a severe woman named Diane with a clipboard and a Bluetooth earpiece, asked her opinion on centerpieces. Whatever you think is best, Stephanie said flatly. Diane frowned. But it's your wedding, dear. You should have input. Stephanie almost laughed. It's not my wedding, it's his. She gestured vaguely toward where her father was standing across the room, deep in conversation with someone she didn't recognize. I'm just the decoration. Diane blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. Well, the roses are lovely. Great. Roses. That night, Stephanie locked herself in her room and tried to think. There had to be a way out of this, some angle she hadn't considered, some leverage she could use. Her father had always taught her to think strategically, to look for weaknesses, to exploit them. So she made a list in her head of everyone involved. Her father, Ruben, the De Castro family, Marco, her mother, Luca. Her chest tightened. Her younger brother was the reason she was here, the reason she'd come back. If she ran again, her father would use him as leverage. He'd already proven that. But what if she could get Luca out first? She grabbed her phone and texted him. Can we meet? Just the two of us. The reply came 5 minutes later. Dad won't let me leave the house without security. I'll come to you. When? Tomorrow. After school. Okay. Stephanie set the phone down and exhaled slowly. It wasn't much, but it was something. Besides, the next day she convinced Marco to drive her to Luca's prep school in Manhattan. He didn't ask why, just nodded and opened the car door. Luca was waiting outside the main building, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking younger than his 16 years. When he saw her, his face lit up. Steph! She pulled him into a hug, holding on longer than she meant to. Hey, kid. I didn't think you'd actually come. Of course I came. She pulled back and studied him. Same messy brown hair, same hazel eyes, same crooked smile. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. He glanced at Marco, who was leaning against the car, watching them. Can we walk? Sure. They walked to a nearby park, Marco trailing 20 feet behind. It was a cold afternoon, the kind where your breath turned to fog and the wind cut through your jacket. Stephanie shoved her hands in her pockets and tried to figure out how to say what she needed to say. Luca beat her to it. I'm sorry. She stopped walking. For what? For what Dad did. Using me to get you to come back. That was fucked up. Luca, I told him I didn't want him to do it, but he said it was for your own good, that you were in danger in Barcelona. Luca kicked at a pebble on the path. I didn't know he was lying. He wasn't lying, Stephanie said quietly. I was in danger. Just not the kind he told you about. Luca looked at her, confusion written all over his face. What do you mean? Stephanie sat down on a nearby bench. Luca sat beside her. The guy I met in Barcelona, she said. Ruben. Dad sent him there to watch me, to make sure I didn't do anything stupid, and then when I fell for him, Dad saw an opportunity. She laughed bitterly. He turned my escape into a business deal. Luca was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Do you love him? Ruben? The question caught her off guard. I don't know. Maybe. I thought I did. She rubbed her face. But how can I love someone who lied to me from the start? Did he know that Dad sent him? He says he didn't, not at first. Do you believe him? Stephanie looked at her brother. I don't know what to believe anymore. Luca reached over and took her hand. Then don't marry him. It's not that simple. Why not? Because Dad will... She stopped, took a breath. Because if I run again, he'll use you to bring me back. And I can't let that happen. So you're going to sacrifice yourself? For me? Luca shook his head. That's bullshit, Steph. Language. I'm serious. You can't live your life trying to protect me. I can take care of myself. You're 16. So? You left when you were 26. You got 6 years. I can wait 6 years. Stephanie felt her throat tighten. Luca, I'm not a kid anymore, Steph, and I don't need you to be a martyr. He squeezed her hand. If you don't want to marry him, don't. I'll be fine. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. But she knew her father, knew what he was capable of when someone defied him. I'll think about it, she said finally. Luca nodded. Okay. They sat in silence for a while, watching the park slowly empty as the sun dropped lower in the sky. Eventually, Marco approached and cleared his throat. We should go, he said. Stefani stood. Luca stood with her. Hey, he said. Whatever you decide, I'm on your side. She pulled him into another hug. I love you, kid. Love you too. Marco drove her back to the estate in silence. When they pulled up to the gate, Stephanie said, Can I ask you something? Marco glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Depends on the question. If I asked you to help me leave, would you? Marco's expression didn't change. No. Why not? Because your father pays me to keep you safe, and running isn't safe. Safe for who? Me or him? Marco didn't answer. Stephanie got out of the car and walked inside, feeling more trapped than ever. Papas? That evening, Ruben came to dinner again. This time, he didn't wait for permission. He showed up unannounced, walked past the security at the gate like he owned the place, and found Stephanie in the library. She was curled up in an armchair, reading, or pretending to read, a book she'd grabbed at random. When she heard footsteps, she looked up and felt her stomach drop. What are you doing here? Ruben closed the door behind him. We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about. Yes, we do. He crossed the room and sat on the arm of the chair across from her. I know you don't trust me. I know you think I lied to you, and I get it, but I'm asking you to listen, just for 5 minutes. Stephanie set the book aside. Fine. 5 minutes. Ruben leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When your father approached my family about this marriage, I said no. She blinked. What? I told him I wasn't interested, that I didn't need an arranged marriage to secure an alliance. Ruben's voice was low, steady. But then he told me about you, showed me a photo, said you were smart, stubborn, trying to escape the life. And I thought, fuck it. If she's trying to escape, maybe I can help. By pretending to fall for me. I wasn't pretending. His eyes locked on hers. I went to Barcelona thinking I'd keep my distance, just watch, make sure you were safe. But then I met you, and he stopped, ran a hand through his hair. You weren't what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. A spoiled Mafia princess, someone shallow, someone like the women I grew up around. He smiled faintly. But you were reading Camus in a shitty cafe, working at a bookstore, trying so hard to be normal. I am normal. No, you're not. You're extraordinary, and you don't even see it. Stephanie felt her chest tighten. Stop. Stop what? Saying things like that. Trying to make me believe you actually care. I do care. Then why are you still going through with this wedding? Ruben's jaw tightened. Because if I don't, my family will cut me off, disown me, and I'll lose everything I've spent my entire life building. So it's about money. It's about survival. He stood, pacing now. You think your father's the only one with power over his kids? My family's been grooming me to take over since I was 10 years old. If I defy them now, they'll replace me with my cousin or my uncle, someone who will fall in line. And you can't let that happen. No, I can't. He stopped pacing and looked at her. But that doesn't mean I don't want this to work between us. It doesn't mean I don't... He stopped himself. Don't what? Care about you more than I should. Stephanie stood, closing the distance between them. You keep saying that, but caring isn't enough. Not when you're willing to trap me in a marriage I don't want just to keep your inheritance. It's not just about the inheritance. Then what is it about, Ruben? Explain it to me. Make me understand why I should trust you. He stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked lost. I don't know how. Then we have nothing left to say. She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist. Wait. Let go of me. Not until you hear this. His grip wasn't tight, but it was firm, insistent. I know I fucked up. I know I should have told you the truth in Barcelona, but I was scared. Scared that if you knew who I really was, you'd run. And I wasn't ready to lose you yet. You never had me. Yes, I did. He pulled her closer, just slightly. For those 2 weeks in Barcelona, I had you, and you had me, and it was real, Stephanie. I don't care what your father says or what you think you know. What we had was real. Stephanie's breath hitched. You're lying. I'm not. Prove it. Ruben's eyes searched hers. Then, slowly, he let go of her wrist and stepped back. I can't. Not in a way you'll believe. Not right now. He exhaled. But I'm asking you to give me a chance. After the wedding, give me time to show you that I'm not the enemy here. And if I don't, then we'll spend the rest of our lives hating each other. And I really don't want that. Stephanie felt tears prick her eyes. She hated him for this. Hated him for making her feel something when she was trying so hard to feel nothing. Get out, she whispered. Ruben nodded. Okay. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. For all of it. Then he left. Stephanie stood alone in the library, shaking, and knew with absolute certainty that she was in way over her head. Sans. The days blurred together after that. Dress fittings, meetings with the planner, endless phone calls from relatives she barely knew, all congratulating her on her wonderful news. She smiled, nodded, played the part, but inside she was unraveling. One night she found herself standing in her father's study, staring at the massive oak desk where he conducted his business. She'd always been forbidden from entering this room as a child. It was his sanctuary, his domain. Now she was alone in it. She moved to the desk and started opening drawers. Files, contracts, ledgers written in code she didn't fully understand. Her father was meticulous, everything documented, everything accounted for. And then she found it. A folder labeled De Castro Alliance. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were contracts, agreements between her father's organization and the De Castro family. Trade routes, money laundering operations, arms deals, and at the bottom, a wedding contract, signed by both families. Stephanie's name was already on it. She flipped to the next page and froze. There was a clause, buried in the legal jargon, a clause that said if the marriage didn't happen, both families would lose their partnership, millions of dollars, years of infrastructure, and more. There was a secondary agreement, one that outlined what would happen if either family violated the terms. Retribution through immediate family members. Her stomach turned. This wasn't just about business. This was about survival. Her father had tied his entire empire to this marriage, and if it fell through, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Stephanie shoved the folder back into the drawer, closed it quietly, and slipped out of the study just as Marco rounded the corner. He looked at her. You okay? Fine. You sure? Yeah, just couldn't sleep. Marco studied her for a moment, then nodded. Get some rest, Stephanie. Big day tomorrow. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. Tomorrow was the final dress fitting. Tomorrow, this all became real. C'était. The fitting took place in a boutique in Soho, closed to the public for the occasion. Stephanie stood on a platform in front of 3 full-length mirrors while 2 seamstresses fussed over the hem of her dress. Her mother sat on a velvet couch nearby, sipping champagne and offering commentary. The train is gorgeous, very regal. Stephanie didn't respond. Elena set her glass down. You know, when I got married, I cried the entire morning. My mother had to redo my makeup 3 times. Why were you crying? Because I was terrified. Elena smiled faintly. But I walked down that aisle anyway, and it turned out okay. Did it? Elena's expression hardened. What's that supposed to mean? You've spent 30 years married to a man who lies for a living, who hurts people, who uses his own children as leverage. Stephanie met her mother's eyes in the mirror. Is that really okay? One of the seamstresses coughed awkwardly. Elena stood. Outside, she said. They stepped into a back hallway, away from prying eyes and ears. Elena closed the door behind them and turned to face Stephanie. You think I don't know what your father is? Her voice was low, sharp. You think I've been blind all these years? I think you've been complicit. Elena's hand moved so fast Stephanie didn't see it coming. The slap echoed in the narrow hallway. Stephanie's cheeks stung. She stared at her mother, shocked. Don't you dare judge me, Elena said quietly. You have no idea what I've sacrificed, what I've endured, what I've done to keep this family together. By letting Dad turn me into a bargaining chip? By doing what needed to be done. Elena's eyes were cold. You think you're the first woman in this family to be given away? You think you're special? You're not. You're just next in line. Then I'll be the first to say no. And doom your brother in the process? Doom your father's business? Doom everyone who depends on this alliance? Elena shook her head. You're not that selfish, Stephanie. I raised you better than that. Stephanie's throat closed. I hate you. You'll get over it. Elena turned and walked back into the fitting room, leaving Stephanie alone in the hallway, shaking with rage and grief and something she couldn't name. That night, Stephanie made a decision. She couldn't run, couldn't defy her father outright, couldn't protect Luca if she burned everything down, but she could fight back. She waited until the house was quiet, then slipped into her father's study again. This time she went straight for the computer. Her father wasn't a tech genius, but he wasn't careless either. The system was password protected, encrypted. But Stephanie had grown up watching him work, had memorized his patterns, his tells. She tried his birthday. Wrong. Her mother's birthday. Wrong. Then, on a hunch, she tried Luca's birthday. The system unlocked. Stephanie exhaled and started digging. Files, emails, transaction records, everything her father had kept hidden from the world, and buried in a subfolder labeled Security Protocols, she found something that made her blood run cold. A file titled Wedding Day Contingency. She opened it. Inside was a detailed plan, a timeline, a list of names, and at the top, in bold letters, Eliminate De Castro heir if alliance compromised. Stephanie's hands went numb. Her father wasn't just protecting his business with this marriage. He was planning to kill Ruben if it fell through, or worse, if Ruben ever became a threat. She scrolled down. There were contingencies for everything. If Ruben tried to renegotiate the terms, if he sided with his family over hers, if he ever tried to leave her. Her father had planned for every scenario, except one. What if she warned him? Stephanie sat back in the chair, her mind racing. She'd spent weeks hating Ruben, blaming him, seeing him as just another player in her father's game. But this changed everything. Ruben wasn't safe. He was a target. And if she didn't do something, her father would kill him the second he stopped being useful. She grabbed her phone and typed out a message. "We need to meet, tonight, alone." She sent it before she could second-guess herself. The reply came 2 minutes later. "Where?" "The old marina. Pier 9. Midnight. I'll be there." Stephanie deleted the messages, shut down the computer, and slipped out of the study. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she had control. But she also knew, deep in her gut, that this was the moment everything would change. The marina was deserted when Stephanie arrived. The air smelled like salt and rust, and the only sound was the gentle slap of water against the docks. She stood at the end of Pier 9, hands shoved in her jacket pockets, and waited. Ruben appeared 10 minutes later, walking out of the shadows like he belonged there. "You came," she said. "You asked." They stood facing each other, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. "Why did you want to meet?" Ruben asked. Stephanie took a breath. "Because I found something. In my father's files." His expression sharpened. "What kind of something?" "A plan. A contingency." She met his eyes. "If this marriage doesn't work out the way he wants, he's going to kill you." Ruben went very still. "You're sure?" "I saw the file. Dates, names, methods." Her voice shook. "He's been planning it since the beginning." For a long moment, Ruben didn't move. Then he exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "Fuck. You didn't know?" "No, I knew he was dangerous. I didn't know he was planning to—" He stopped, looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you were right." "About what?" "Barcelona. What we had. It was real." Stephanie stepped closer. "And I can't let him kill you for it." Ruben stared at her, something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "Stephanie, I need your help," she said quickly. "I need to stop this wedding, but I can't do it alone. If I run, he'll hurt Luca. If I defy him outright, he'll destroy both our families. But if we work together, we can find a way out." "Maybe." Ruben reached out and took her hand. "Okay. Okay? I'm in. Whatever you need, I'll help." Stephanie felt something crack open in her chest. Relief, hope, fear. "There's one more thing," she said. "What?" She hesitated. Then before she could stop herself, she pulled out her phone and showed him the file. The contingency plan. The list of names. Ruben read it in silence, his expression growing darker with every line. When he finished, he looked up. "Your father's not the only one on this list." "I know." "My family's involved too." "I know." Ruben's jaw tightened. "This isn't just about the wedding. This is about control, power. They're using us as pawns to justify a war they've been planning for years. Then we stop them." "How?" Stephanie's voice was steady. "We burn it all down." Ruben stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was a dangerous smile, the kind that said he was finally done playing nice. "When do we start?" "Now." And just like that, the war began. They left the marina separately. Ruben first, disappearing into the shadows like he'd never been there. Stephanie waited 15 minutes, then walked back to where Marco had parked the car 3 blocks away. He didn't ask questions, just drove her home in silence. When they pulled up to the estate, Stephanie said, "Marco, if I asked you to look the other way for one night, just one, would you?" Marco kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Depends on the night." The wedding, his hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's not a small ask." "I know." "Your father would kill me." "He'd have to find out first." Marco turned to look at her then, really look at her, and something in his expression shifted. "You're planning something stupid, aren't you?" "Probably." "Stephanie, I'm not asking you to help, just to not stop me." She met his eyes. "Please." Marco stared at her for a long moment. Then he sighed and looked away. "I didn't see you leave the marina tonight. I didn't see you get back. And if something happens on your wedding day that I could have prevented?" He paused. "I must have been distracted." Stephanie's throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. If this goes sideways, we're both dead." I know. She got out of the car and walked into the house, her mind already 3 steps ahead. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in deception. Stephanie played the perfect bride. She smiled at the dress fittings, approved the final seating chart, listened to her mother's advice on how to greet the guests. She was compliant, agreeable, everything her father wanted her to be, and the entire time she was planning a coup. She met with Ruben twice more. Once in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, surrounded by enough people that no one would notice them. Once in a hotel room in Queens that Ruben paid for in cash. Each time, they refined the plan. "We need evidence," Ruben said during their second meeting. He was pacing the small hotel room, still wearing the suit he'd had on for a business meeting earlier. "Something concrete, something that'll force both our families to back down." "I have the files," Stephanie said. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, laptop open in front of her. "But they're encrypted, and I can't access all of them from my father's home system." "Where's the main server?" "His office, downtown, but it's guarded 24/7. Ruben stopped pacing. "Can you get me in?" "Maybe, if I tell him I need to grab something for the wedding, a file, a contract." She looked up at him. "But you'd have to move fast, 5 minutes, tops." "I can work with 5 minutes. And once you're in, I download everything. The contingency plans, the alliance contracts, every dirty deal both our families have made in the last decade." His voice was hard. "And then we leak it, to the feds, to the press, to everyone." Stephanie's stomach twisted. "That'll destroy them." "That's the point. My father will know it was me. So will mine." Ruben sat down beside her. "We do this. There's no going back. We'll both be cut off. Disowned. Probably hunted." "I know." "And you're okay with that?" Stephanie looked at him. At this man she'd met in Barcelona, who'd lied to her and saved her and somehow become the only person she trusted in this entire mess. "Are you?" Ruben reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle it nearly broke her. "I've spent my entire life doing what I was told, playing the role being the perfect heir." He smiled faintly. "I think it's time I chose something for myself. Even if it means losing everything? Especially then." Stephanie kissed him. It was impulsive and desperate and maybe a terrible idea, but she didn't care. She kissed him like the world was ending, which, in a way, it was. When they pulled apart, Ruben rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "We're going to survive this. Promise?" "Promise." It was a lie. They both knew it, but in that moment, it was enough. 3 days before the wedding, Stephanie went to her father's office. She'd called ahead, told his assistant she needed to review the prenuptial agreement one more time. It was a reasonable request. Expected, even. Adriano was waiting for her when she arrived, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk like a king on a throne. "Stephanie, this is a surprise. I wanted to make sure I understood the terms." She sat down across from him, crossing her legs. "Before I sign," Adriano smiled. "Smart. I raised you well." He slid a folder across the desk. Stephanie opened it and pretended to read, her eyes scanning the pages without absorbing a single word. What she was really doing was watching, waiting. Adriano's phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned, and stood. "I need to take this. Give me 5 minutes." "Of course." The moment he stepped out of the office, Stephanie moved. She crossed to his desk, pulled a small USB drive from her pocket, and plugged it into the computer. The screen lit up, password protected. Her hands were shaking as she typed in Luca's birthday again. Access granted. She opened the file directory and started the download. Contracts, emails, financial records, the contingency plan, everything. The progress bar crept forward. 10%, 20%. Come on, 40%! She heard footsteps in the hallway. 60%. The door handle turned. 80%. Adriano walked in. Stephanie yanked the USB drive out and shoved it into her pocket, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Find what you needed?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." She stood, forcing herself to move slowly, casually. "I think I'm ready to sign." Adriano studied her for a moment. Then he smiled. "Good. I'm proud of you, Bambina. You're doing the right thing. Stephanie smiled back. I know. She left the office, walked to the elevator, and didn't breathe again until she was outside on the street. Then she pulled out her phone and texted Ruben. Got it. His reply was immediate. Good. Now we wait. The wedding was set for Saturday at 6 in the evening. By Friday night, the estate was crawling with people. Caterers, florists, security teams from both families. The entire place had been transformed into something out of a magazine. White roses everywhere, candles lining the walkways, a string quartet rehearsing in the ballroom. Stephanie stood in her room staring at the wedding dress hanging on the back of her door and felt like she was staring at a coffin. There was a knock. Come in. Luca stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He looked older than he had a week ago, tired. You okay? No. He sat down on the edge of her bed. You don't have to do this, you know. Yes, I do. Steph? Luca, listen to me. She sat down beside him and took his hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to stay out of it. Don't ask questions. Don't try to help. Just stay out of it. What are you talking about? I'm serious. Promise me. Luca's eyes searched hers. You're planning something. Promise me. He hesitated. Then he nodded. Okay. I promise. Stephanie pulled him into a hug and held on tight. I love you, kid. I love you too. When he left, Stephanie locked the door and pulled out her laptop. She opened the files she'd stolen from her father's office and started reading. Hours passed. The sun set. The house went quiet. And then, buried in a subfolder she almost missed, Stephanie found something that made her blood turn to ice. A communication thread between her father and someone named V. Constantine. She didn't recognize the name, but the content of the messages was clear. Adriano. Wedding proceeds as planned. Once alliance is secured, we move on the De Castro assets. Total acquisition within 6 months. V. Constantine. And the heir? Adriano. Eliminated. Made to look like an accident. His death will destabilize the family enough for us to take control. V. Constantine. Ambitious. I like it. What about your daughter? Adriano. She's a means to an end. Once she's served her purpose, she'll be contained. Stephanie's vision blurred. Contained. Her father wasn't just planning to kill Ruben. He was planning to imprison her. She read further. The messages detailed everything. The timeline, the method, the endgame. Her father had never intended for this marriage to be permanent. It was a trap. A way to lure the De Castro family into a false sense of security before destroying them from the inside. And Stephanie was the bait. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely type. She forwarded the entire thread to Ruben, then to a secure email address he'd given her for emergencies. Then she sat back and tried to breathe. She thought she understood her father, thought she knew how ruthless he could be. But this was something else. This was evil. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ruben. I saw the files. We need to move up the timeline. To when? Tomorrow, during the ceremony. That's insane. It's the only way. Once you're legally bound to me, your father will move fast. We have to hit him first. Stephanie stared at the message, her mind racing. Tomorrow, the wedding. In front of 300 guests, half of whom were armed. How? I'll explain tomorrow morning. Meet me at the church. 7 a.m. Alone. Okay. She set the phone down and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened grounds of the estate. Somewhere out there, her father was probably sleeping soundly, confident in his plan. But tomorrow, Stephanie was going to burn his entire world to the ground. She didn't sleep. At 6 in the morning, she got dressed, jeans, a hoodie, sneakers, and slipped out of the house before anyone was awake. Marco was nowhere to be seen. Either he was honoring his promise or he'd decided ignorance was safer. The church was empty when she arrived, the massive wooden doors unlocked. She stepped inside and found Ruben waiting in the front pew, dressed in black, a duffel bag at his feet. You came, he said. You thought I wouldn't? I wasn't sure. He stood and crossed to her. Are you ready for this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Ruben unzipped the duffel bag and pulled out a small black device. This is a signal jammer. It'll block all cell service in a half-mile radius. Once I activate it, no one can call for backup. And then what? Then we expose everything, in front of everyone. He handed her a flash drive. This has copies of all the files, the contingency plans, the messages between your father and Constantine. Everything. How do we get it out there? The ceremony's being live-streamed for family members who couldn't attend. I hacked the feed. When I give the signal, this drive will broadcast to every screen in the building and to the internet. Stephanie stared at him. You've been planning this since the night at the marina. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed you to be convincing. If you knew the full plan, you might have slipped up. He paused. And because I needed to make sure you'd go through with it. You didn't trust me. I didn't trust myself. Ruben's voice was quiet. I've spent my whole life playing it safe, following the rules. This is the first time I've ever bet everything on someone else. Stephanie looked at the flash drive in her hand. If we do this, people will die. Your family, mine, the blowback will be catastrophic, I know. Ruben took her hand. But if we don't do it, we'll spend the rest of our lives as prisoners, and I'd rather die free than live in a cage. Stephanie closed her fingers around the flash drive. Okay, let's do it. The hours before the ceremony passed in a blur. Stephanie returned to the estate and went through the motions. Hair, makeup, the dress. Her mother fussed over her, adjusting the veil, smoothing the train. You look beautiful, Elena said softly. Stephanie didn't respond. At 5:30, the guests began arriving. Black cars lined the driveway. Men in expensive suits, women dripping in diamonds. The elite of two criminal empires gathered to witness a union that was supposed to secure their futures. Instead, they were about to watch it all collapse. At 5:50, Stephanie stood in the bridal suite, staring at herself in the mirror. She looked like someone else. Someone polished and perfect and obedient. But underneath the dress, taped to her thigh, was the flash drive. There was a knock on the door. It's time, Marco said from the other side. Stephanie took a deep breath. Okay. She opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. Marco was waiting, dressed in a suit, his expression unreadable. You sure about this? No? Good. That means you're thinking clearly. He offered his arm. Let's go. They walked through the mansion, down the grand staircase, out to the waiting car. The ride to the church took 15 minutes. Stephanie spent every second of it running through the plan in her head. Ruben would be waiting at the altar. The signal jammer would activate the moment she entered the sanctuary. And then, at the precise moment the officiant asked if anyone objected, the truth would come out. They arrived at the church. The valet opened Stephanie's door. She stepped out into the late afternoon sun, the train of her dress pooling behind her on the pavement. Inside, the sanctuary was packed. 300 people, maybe more. She could see her father standing near the front, talking to someone she didn't recognize. Her mother was already seated, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. And at the altar, waiting in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, was Ruben. Their eyes met across the crowded room. He nodded once. It was time. The music started. Wagner. Loud and dramatic and utterly wrong for what was about to happen. Stephanie took Marco's arm and began the walk down the aisle. Every step felt like a mile. The guests turned to watch, smiling, whispering. She could feel their eyes on her, judging, approving, congratulating. They had no idea. Halfway down the aisle, Stephanie felt her phone vibrate in the hidden pocket of her dress. A single buzz. The jammer was active. She kept walking, 10 feet from the altar, 5 feet. Ruben extended his hand. She took it. His fingers were steady. Hers were not. The officiant, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, smiled and began. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Stephanie tuned him out. She was watching Ruben, who was watching the balcony where the live stream cameras were set up. The officiant droned on. Vows, commitment, unity. And then finally, if anyone has reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. Ruben squeezed her hand. This was it. Stephanie reached for the flash drive taped to her thigh and froze. It wasn't there. Panic shot through her. She'd taped it securely. She'd checked it twice before leaving the estate. It should be... Looking for this? The voice came from behind her. Stephanie turned. Her father was standing in the aisle holding the flash drive between two fingers like it was a piece of trash. The sanctuary went silent. Adriano smiled. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you sneaking into my office? That I wouldn't track every move you made? He shook his head. I'm disappointed, Bambina. I taught you better than this. Stephanie's throat closed. Marco. Adriano gestured to where Marco stood near the entrance, his face carefully blank. He's been reporting to me the entire time. Every meeting, every plan, every pathetic attempt at rebellion. Stephanie looked at Marco. He didn't look away, didn't apologize, just stood there like a statue. She couldn't finish the sentence. I did warn you, Marco said quietly. Your father pays me to keep you safe, and sometimes that means protecting you from yourself. Ruben stepped forward. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Adriano's voice cut through the room like a blade. He looked at Ruben, and his smile turned cold. You thought you were so clever, hacking the live stream, planning your little exposure, but I've known about it for days. He held up the flash drive. And now I have all the evidence you tried to gather, which means I have leverage over you, over your family, over everyone in this room. Ruben's jaw tightened. You can't. I can, and I will. Adriano turned to the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. It seems my daughter and her future husband had a misguided plan to disrupt this ceremony. But don't worry, we'll proceed as scheduled. He walked down the aisle and stopped in front of Stefani. Up close, she could see the fury in his eyes. You will marry him, he said quietly, so only she could hear. You will smile. You will play your part, and when this is over, you will spend the rest of your life regretting this little stunt. I hate you, Stephanie whispered. I know. Adriano turned to the officiant. Continue. The officiant, pale and shaking, cleared his throat. Where were we? The vows, Adriano said. Get on with it. Stephanie stood there, numb, as the ceremony resumed. Ruben was beside her, his hand still holding hers, but she couldn't feel it. Couldn't feel anything. Everything they'd planned. Everything they'd risked. It was gone. The officiant asked for rings. Someone, Ruben's best man, she thought, handed them over. Do you, Ruben de Castro, take Stephanie Varelli to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Stephanie Varelli? Stephanie opened her mouth. The word was right there. All she had to do was say it. But instead she turned to Ruben and whispered, I'm sorry. And then she ran. She grabbed the front of her dress, yanked it up, and bolted down the aisle. Chaos erupted. Her father shouted. Guests stood. Security moved. But Stephanie was faster. She burst through the church doors and into the late afternoon sun, the train of her dress trailing behind her like a broken wing. She didn't know where she was going, didn't have a plan. All she knew was that she couldn't do it, couldn't stand there and marry Ruben while her father held all the cards. She made it to the street before hands grabbed her. Marco. Let me go, she screamed. Stephanie, stop! Let me go! She fought him, clawed at his hands, kicked, screamed. But Marco was stronger, and within seconds, he had her pinned against the side of a car. Enough, he said. I hate you. I hate all of you. I know. Other security arrived. 4 men, 6. They surrounded her like she was a threat. Her father emerged from the church, calm and composed, like this was just another day. Take her home, he said. No, and lock her in her room until I decide what to do with her. No, what? But it didn't matter. They lifted her, still kicking, still screaming, and shoved her into the back seat of a car. The last thing she saw before the door slammed shut was Ruben, standing on the church steps, watching her disappear. He didn't try to stop them, he just stood there. And Stephanie realized with a cold, sinking certainty that he'd known. He'd known this would happen, and he'd let it. They took her back to the estate and locked her in her bedroom. Stephanie tore off the wedding dress and threw it across the room. Then she grabbed a lamp and hurled it at the wall. It shattered. She didn't care. She destroyed everything she could reach. The mirror, the chair, the perfectly arranged flowers on the dresser. And when there was nothing left to break, she collapsed on the floor and sobbed. Hours passed. The sun set. The room went dark. And then, finally, the door opened. Stephanie looked up, expecting her father, expecting Marco, expecting anyone but the person standing in the doorway. Ruben. Get out, she said. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about. Stephanie, you knew. Her voice cracked. You knew my father would find out. You knew the plan would fail. And you didn't tell me. Ruben's expression was unreadable. I didn't know. I suspected. That's not better. It's the truth. Then why didn't you warn me? Because if I had, you wouldn't have gone through with it, and we needed your father to think he'd won. Ruben crossed the room and crouched in front of her. This isn't over, Stephanie. Yes, it is. He has the flash drive. He has all the evidence. He won. No, he has a flash drive. Ruben pulled something from his pocket and held it up. Another flash drive, identical to the first. Stephanie's breath caught. What? The one you had was a decoy. I knew your father would find it, knew he'd think he'd stopped us. Ruben smiled faintly. But the real files? I uploaded them 3 hours ago to every major news outlet, to the FBI, to Interpol. Stephanie stared at him. It's done. By tomorrow morning, both our families will be front-page news, and there's nothing your father can do to stop it. But why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to react like it was real. If you'd known it was a setup, your father would have seen through it. Ruben reached out and took her hand. I'm sorry. I know it was cruel, but it was the only way. Stephanie's mind was reeling. So we actually did it? We did. And my father is about to lose everything. For a long moment, Stephanie just stared at him. Then she started laughing. It was a broken, hysterical sound, but she couldn't stop. We're insane, she said. Probably. We're going to die. Maybe. Ruben pulled her to her feet. But not tonight. Then when? I don't know, but I know this. I'm not leaving you. He cupped her face in his hands. Whatever happens next, we face it together, okay? Stephanie looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. The fear, the determination, the reckless, desperate hope. Okay, she whispered. And then, because the world was ending anyway, she kissed him. It was a kiss that tasted like ash and defiance, and the last shred of something that might have been love. And when they pulled apart, Stephanie knew, deep in her bones, that nothing would ever be the same. The war had begun, and they were right in the center of it. The kiss ended when they heard footsteps in the hallway. Ruben pulled back, his hand still on Stephanie's face. We need to move. Now. Where? Anywhere but here. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the window. Can you climb? Stephanie looked at the 3-story drop to the garden below. Are you serious? Dead serious. I'll break my neck. Not if you hold on to me. Ruben was already opening the window, scanning the exterior wall. There was a trellis running down the side of the house, thick with dead ivy. It'll hold our weight, probably. Probably? You have a better idea? Stephanie didn't. The footsteps were getting closer. Heavy boots. Multiple people. They're coming for you, Ruben said. Your father knows I'm here. We have maybe 2 minutes before they break down that door. Stephanie looked at the door, then at the window, then back at Ruben. Okay, she said. Let's go. Ruben went first, swinging his leg over the windowsill and finding purchase on the trellis. It creaked under his weight, but held. He looked up at her. Your turn. Stephanie kicked off her heels, hiked up what was left of her dress, and climbed out after him. The night air was cold against her skin. Her hands found the wooden slats of the trellis, rough and splintering. She started climbing down, one hand after another, her bare feet slipping against the wall. Above them, someone pounded on the bedroom door. Stephanie, open up! Faster, Ruben hissed. She moved faster. Her hands were shaking, her legs were shaking. Everything was shaking. The trellis groaned. Don't look down, Ruben said. She looked down. They were still 15 feet up. The pounding grew louder. Then there was a crash, the door being kicked in. She's gone! Check the window! Stephanie's foot slipped. She gasped, scrambling for a hold, her fingers digging into the wood until she found it again. I've got you, Ruben said from below. His hand was on her ankle, steadying her. Keep going. She kept going, 10 feet, 5 feet, and then the trellis gave way. They fell the last few feet, landing hard on the lawn. Stephanie's shoulder hit first, pain shooting through her arm. Reuben rolled and was on his feet in seconds, pulling her up. "Run," he said. They ran. Across the lawn, through the gardens, toward the back gate. Stephanie's feet were bleeding. Her dress was torn to shreds. She could hear shouting behind them, footsteps, the metallic click of guns being drawn. "There!" A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Reuben grabbed her hand and yanked her sideways into the cover of the hedges. They crashed through branches, thorns tearing at their skin, and came out on the other side in the narrow service road that ran behind the estate. A car was waiting, engine running, headlights off. Reuben wrenched open the passenger door and shoved Stephanie inside, then ran around to the driver's side. He slammed his foot on the gas before his door was even closed. They peeled out onto the street, tires screaming. Stephanie twisted in her seat, looking back. Figures were emerging from the estate, running after them. One of them raised a gun. "Get down!" Reuben shouted. She ducked. The rear window shattered. Glass exploded across the back seat. Stephanie covered her head, her ears ringing from the gunshot. Reuben swerved hard, taking a corner at 50 miles an hour, and the estate disappeared behind them. For a long moment, the only sound was the engine and their ragged breathing. Then Stephanie sat up slowly, brushing glass out of her hair. "What the hell was that?" "That," Reuben said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, "was your father's security trying to kill us." "They shot at us." "Yeah. They actually shot at us." "Welcome to my world." Stephanie stared at him. Then, inexplicably, she started laughing again, that same broken, hysterical sound from earlier. "We're going to die." "Not tonight." "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." Reuben glanced at her, and despite everything, he smiled. "We're not dying tonight, Stephanie. We're just getting started." Batting. They drove for an hour, taking side streets and back roads, doubling back twice to make sure they weren't being followed. Eventually, Reuben pulled into the parking garage of a building in Brooklyn, nondescript, gray concrete, the kind of place no one noticed. "Where are we?" Stephanie asked. "Safe house. One of mine." He killed the engine and looked at her. "No one knows about this place. Not my family. Not your father. We'll be safe here. For now." They got out of the car and took the stairs to the 3rd floor. Reuben unlocked a door at the end of the hallway and ushered her inside. The apartment was small, bare walls, minimal furniture. A couch, a table, a bed in the corner. It looked like a place designed for disappearing. Stephanie stood in the middle of the room, suddenly aware of how she must look. Torn dress, bleeding feet, hair falling out of its carefully constructed updo. She looked like a disaster. "Bathroom's through there," Reuben said, gesturing to a door on the left. "There should be clothes in the closet. Men's stuff, but it'll fit well enough." Stephanie nodded and walked into the bathroom. She closed the door, leaned against it, and finally let herself breathe. Her reflection in the mirror was shocking. Makeup smeared, a cut on her cheek she didn't remember getting, bruises forming on her shoulder from the fall. She looked like someone who'd been through a war. Maybe she had. She stripped off what was left of the wedding dress and stepped into the shower. The water was scalding, but she didn't turn it down. She stood there until her skin was red and raw, until the blood and dirt swirled down the drain, until she felt almost human again. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, Reuben was sitting on the couch with his phone, scrolling through something. He looked up. "Better?" "Marginally." She found clothes in the closet, an old t-shirt and sweatpants, and changed quickly. When she came back out, Reuben handed her his phone. "You should see this." Stephanie took it. The screen showed a news website. The headline made her stomach drop. "Breaking: FBI raids target organized crime families in New York and Europe." She scrolled down. There were photos. Her father's office, Reuben's family estate in Rome, federal agents swarming both locations. "It worked," she whispered. "It worked. When? About an hour ago. The files I uploaded included financial records, communications, everything. The feds moved fast." Reuben stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "By tomorrow, both our families will be front-page news. And by next week, most of them will be in prison." Stephanie set the phone down, her hands shaking. My father is probably in custody by now, or he will be soon. And your family? Same. Reuben's voice was flat. My father, my uncle, my cousin, everyone. Do you regret it? He turned to look at her. Do you? Stephanie thought about it, about her father, her mother, the life she'd been born into, the life she'd tried so hard to escape. No, she said finally. I don't. Reuben nodded. Neither do I. They stood there in the small, bare apartment, two people who'd just blown up their entire lives, and for a moment it felt almost peaceful. Then Reuben's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his expression hardened. It's my father. Don't answer it. I have to. He swiped to answer and put it on speaker. Hello? The voice that came through was cold and controlled. Reuben, I assume you know what you've done. I do. And you understand the consequences. Yes. There was a pause, then, you've destroyed this family, everything we've built, everything we are. You destroyed it yourself, Reuben said quietly. I just made sure everyone knew. You're a traitor. I'm free. Another pause, longer this time. When Reuben's father spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. You think you're safe? You think you can hide from me? I'm not hiding. Then you're a fool, because I will find you, and when I do, I will make you regret this. You can try. The line went dead. Reuben set the phone down and exhaled slowly. His hands were shaking. Stephanie crossed to him and took his hand. You okay? No. He looked at her and his eyes were raw. But I will be. We will be, she corrected. Yeah. He smiled faintly. We will be. They didn't sleep that night. Instead, they sat on the couch, side by side, watching the news coverage unfold on Reuben's laptop. Every channel was covering it. The raids, the arrests, the leaked files. Stephanie's father was shown being escorted out of his estate in handcuffs, his face blank. Her mother was behind him, crying. Luca wasn't in the footage, and Stephanie hoped that meant he was safe. Reuben's family was equally dramatic. His father shouting at the cameras, his uncle trying to run, his cousin fighting the agents until they tasered him. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrible chaos. And at the center of it all, buried in the news reports, was a single line that made Stephanie's blood run cold. Authorities are searching for Stephanie Varelli and Reuben de Castro, believed to be key witnesses in the case. We're wanted, she said. Not wanted, needed. Reuben closed the laptop. They want us to testify, to corroborate the files. Will we? Do you want to? Stephanie thought about it. About standing in a courtroom facing her father, telling the truth about everything he'd done, everything he'd forced her to become. Yes, she said. I want to. Then we will. Reuben stood and walked to the window again. But not yet. First we need to disappear, really disappear, because even if our fathers are arrested, there are still people loyal to them, people who will come after us. Like who? Like Marco. Stephanie's stomach twisted. Marco wouldn't. He already did. He betrayed you once. He'll do it again if your father tells him to. Reuben turned to face her. We can't trust anyone, Stephanie. Not your family, not mine, not anyone from our old lives. Then who can we trust? Each other. It was such a simple answer, such an impossible answer. But when Reuben held out his hand, Stephanie took it. The next morning, they left Brooklyn. Reuben had cash stashed in the apartment, enough to get them out of the city and keep them moving for a few weeks. They bought a used car from a guy who didn't ask questions, paid in hundreds, and drove west. They didn't have a destination, didn't have a plan beyond keep moving. They stopped at a diner in Pennsylvania for breakfast. Stephanie ordered coffee and pancakes she couldn't eat. Reuben sat across from her, reading a newspaper someone had left behind. Anything new? She asked. Your father's arraignment is tomorrow. So is mine. He folded the paper. They're both pleading not guilty. Of course they are. The prosecution wants us. They've issued a formal request for our cooperation. Stephanie stirred her coffee. What happens if we don't show? They'll issue warrants. We become fugitives. And if we do show, we become targets. She laughed bitterly. So either way, we're screwed. Pretty much. They sat in silence for a while, the diner humming with the low chatter of truckers and travelers. Stephanie watched a waitress refill someone's coffee, smiling like it was the easiest thing in the world. She wondered what that felt like. Being normal, being safe. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. Ruben looked up. "For what?" "For dragging you into this." "You didn't drag me anywhere. I walked in with my eyes open. But if you hadn't met me, then I'd still be playing the perfect heir, still following orders, still pretending I was okay with it." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You didn't ruin my life, Stephanie. You saved it." "I don't feel like a savior." "Good, because you're not. You're just a person trying to survive, same as me." He squeezed her hand. "And we're going to, together." Stephanie wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. But before she could respond, the diner door opened and 3 men walked in. They were big, armed, and they were scanning the room like they were looking for someone. Stephanie's heart stopped. Ruben followed her gaze and went very still. "Don't move." "Are they?" "Yeah." One of the men spotted them. His hand moved to his jacket. "Back door," Ruben said quietly. "On 3. "Ruben, 1. The man started walking toward them. 2. Stephanie's pulse was hammering. 3. They bolted. Ruben threw money on the table and grabbed Stephanie's hand, yanking her out of the booth. They ran for the back of the diner, through the kitchen, past a startled cook who shouted something they didn't hear. Behind them, the men were shouting too. They burst out the back door into an alley. The car was parked 2 streets over, too far. "This way," Ruben said, pulling her left. They ran through the alley, over a fence, across a parking lot. Stephanie's lungs were burning. Her legs were screaming, but she didn't stop. Gunshots echoed behind them. Ruben pulled her down behind a dumpster. "Stay low." "Who are they?" "I don't know. Could be your father's people. Could be mine." "Does it matter?" It didn't. Stephanie peeked around the edge of the dumpster. The men were closer now, spreading out, searching. "We can't outrun them," she whispered. "I know. So what do we do?" Ruben looked at her. Then he pulled a gun from the waistband of his jeans. Stephanie's eyes went wide. "Where did you get that?" "I've had it the whole time." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to know what kind of person I am." He checked the clip. "But I guess that doesn't matter anymore." "Ruben, stay here. When I move, you run for the car. Don't stop. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." "No, he..." He kissed her, hard and fast and desperate. "I love you. Now go." Before she could respond, he stood and fired. The first shot hit one of the men in the shoulder. The second missed. The third hit another man in the leg. And then Ruben was running, drawing their fire away from her. "Go!" he shouted. Stephanie ran. She ran like her life depended on it. Because it did. She ran until she couldn't hear the gunshots anymore. Until she reached the car. Until she was inside, hands shaking so hard she could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. And then, in the rearview mirror, she saw him. Ruben was sprinting toward her, blood on his shirt, limping slightly. Behind him, the men were regrouping. Stephanie threw the passenger door open. "Get in!" Ruben dove inside. She floored the gas before his door was even closed. They tore out of the parking lot, tires screaming, and didn't stop until they were back on the highway, miles away. Only then did Stephanie pull over on the shoulder and look at Ruben. He was breathing hard, pressing a hand to his side. Blood was seeping through his fingers. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "I said I'm fine." Stephanie grabbed his hand and moved it away. There was a gash on his ribs, deep and ugly. "You need a hospital." "No hospitals. They'll find us." "Ruben, I'll be okay, just..." He winced. "Just drive." "Where?" "I don't know. Anywhere. Just keep moving." Stephanie's hands were shaking as she pulled back onto the highway. She didn't know where they were going, didn't know what they were going to do. All she knew was that they were alive. For now. They found a motel an hour later. One of those places with peeling paint and a neon sign that said vacancy in flickering letters. Stephanie paid cash for a room and helped Ruben inside. He collapsed on the bed, his face pale. "Let me see," Stephanie said. She lifted his shirt carefully. The gash wasn't as deep as she'd thought, but it was still bad. It needed stitches. "I don't suppose you know how to sew," Ruben said weakly. "Not people. Guess there's a first time for everything." Stephanie found a first aid kit in the bathroom. Basic, but it would have to do. She cleaned the wound as best she could, Ruben biting down on a towel to keep from screaming. Then she threaded a needle with shaking hands and started stitching. It took 20 minutes. By the end, both of them were sweating. "Done," she said finally. Ruben let out a shaky breath. "You're terrible at that." "You're welcome." He laughed, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. It hurts." Stephanie set the needle aside and sat on the edge of the bed. "You saved my life back there." "You saved mine first." "When?" "Barcelona. When you kissed me." He looked at her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "I was dead inside before I met you, going through the motions, pretending I was okay. But you made me want to be alive again." Stephanie felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Any of it. Running, fighting, surviving." Her voice broke. "I'm so tired, Ruben. I'm so tired of being scared." "I know." He reached for her hand. "Me too." "Then why are we doing this?" "Because the alternative is worse." "Is it?" "Yes." He pulled her closer until she was lying beside him on the narrow bed. "Because if we stop, if we give up, then they win. And I refuse to let that happen." Stephanie closed her eyes and let herself lean into him, careful of his injury. "What if we don't make it?" "Then at least we went down fighting." It wasn't much of a comfort, but it was something. They lay there in the dim motel room, two people clinging to each other in the wreckage of their lives, and tried to believe that tomorrow would be better. It wasn't. The next morning, Stephanie woke to the sound of sirens. She sat up, heart pounding, and looked out the window. Police cars were pulling into the parking lot. 4 of them, maybe more. "Ruben!" She shook him. "Ruben, wake up!" He opened his eyes, groggy. "What?" "The police are here." He was on his feet in seconds, ignoring the pain in his side. He grabbed the gun and moved to the window, peering through the curtain. "They're not here for us," he said. "How do you know?" "Because they're not surrounding the building. They're at the office. Someone called in a disturbance. We need to leave anyway." "Agreed." They grabbed their things, what little they had, and slipped out the back door. The car was still parked where they'd left it. They got in and drove away slowly, casually, like they had nowhere to be. 2 blocks later, Stephanie's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. "Don't answer it," Ruben said. She answered it. "Hello? Stephanie?" The voice was familiar, cold. "I've been looking for you." Her blood turned to ice. "Marco." "You've made quite the mess. The feds, the news. Your father's very disappointed." "I don't care." "You should, because he's still got reach, even from inside." Marco paused. "Where's Ruben?" "None of your business. I'm trying to help you. By selling me out? By lying to me for weeks? By keeping you alive?" Marco's voice was sharp. "You think your father's the only one who wants you dead? Half the organization wants revenge for what you did, and the other half wants to use you as leverage. Then I guess I'm screwed either way. Not if you come in, testify, put your father away for good. The feds will protect you." "I don't trust the feds." "Then trust me." Stephanie laughed bitterly. "Why would I ever do that?" There was a long pause. Then Marco said quietly, "Because I'm the reason you're still breathing. I could have told your father where you were last night, could have sent those men straight to you, but I didn't." "Why not?" "Because you remind me of my daughter, and I don't want to see you end up like her." Stephanie's throat tightened. "What happened to her?" "She died, caught in the crossfire of a war that wasn't hers." His voice was raw. "And I've been trying to make up for it ever since. By working for my father. By keeping his daughter alive." Stephanie didn't know what to say. The feds want to meet, Marco continued. Tomorrow. Neutral location. You and Ruben both. They'll offer you protection in exchange for testimony. And if we don't show? Then you keep running, and eventually someone catches you. He paused. I'm sending you the details. Show up or don't. Your choice. The line went dead. Stephanie set the phone down, her hands shaking. Ruben glanced at her. What did he say? He wants us to meet with the feds. Tomorrow. Do you trust him? No. Neither do I. Ruben's jaw was tight. But we're running out of options. So what do? We show up, we hear what they have to say, and then we decide. Stephanie nodded slowly. Okay. But deep down, she knew this was it. Tomorrow, everything would change. One way or another, the war was about to end, and she had no idea if they'd survive it. The meeting was set for noon at a federal building in Lower Manhattan. Neutral ground, Marco had said. Protection guaranteed. Stephanie didn't believe in guarantees anymore. She and Ruben spent the morning in a diner 3 blocks away, nursing coffee neither of them could drink. Ruben's stitches were holding, but he moved carefully, like every breath cost him. Stephanie watched the door, watched the windows, watched everyone who walked past. We don't have to do this, Ruben said quietly. Yes, we do. We could keep running, disappear for real, new names, new lives. For how long? Stephanie set her cup down. A year? 5 years? The rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? She shook her head. I'm done running. Ruben studied her face. You've changed. So have you. Not for the better. I don't know about that. She reached across the table and took his hand. A month ago, you would have walked away, taken the easy road, protected yourself. A month ago, I didn't have you. The words settled between them, heavy and true. At 11:45, they left the diner and walked the 3 blocks to the federal building. It was a gray concrete tower, identical to 1,000 others, designed to be forgettable. Security was tight, metal detectors, armed guards, cameras everywhere. Marco was waiting in the lobby. He looked older than Stephanie remembered, tired. His suit was rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. When he saw them, something that might have been relief crossed his face. You came, he said. You sound surprised, Stephanie replied. I am. Marco gestured toward the elevators. They're waiting upstairs, 6th floor. Who's they? FBI, Organized Crime Task Force, a prosecutor from the Southern District. He paused. And your brother? Stephanie's breath caught. Luca's here? He's been cooperating, gave a statement yesterday. Kid's tougher than he looks. Stephanie felt something crack open in her chest. Relief, fear, love, all of it at once. They took the elevator to the 6th floor. The hallway was lined with conference rooms, all glass and sterile white walls. Marco led them to the one at the end. Inside, 4 people were waiting. 3 of them were strangers, 2 men in suits, 1 woman with glasses and a laptop. FBI, probably. The prosecutor. And sitting at the far end of the table, looking small and out of place, was Luca. He looked up when Stephanie entered. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Luca stood and crossed the room, pulling her into a hug so tight she couldn't breathe. I thought you were dead, he whispered. I'm okay. I'm okay. Stephanie held him, her eyes burning. Are you? Yeah, I'm good. He pulled back and looked at Ruben. You kept her safe. She kept herself safe, Ruben said. I just tried not to slow her down. One of the men in suits cleared his throat. Ms. Varelli, Mr. DeCastro, I'm Special Agent Chen. This is Agent Morrison and Assistant U.S. Attorney Wallace. He gestured to the empty chairs. Please, sit. They sat. Luca stayed close to Stefani, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Agent Chen folded his hands on the table. Let me be direct. We have enough evidence to prosecute both your fathers and most of their upper-level associates. The files you provided, combined with testimony from other witnesses, paint a very clear picture of racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and about a dozen other federal crimes. Good, Stephanie said flatly. Lock them up. We intend to, but we need your cooperation to make the case airtight. Chen looked at her, then at Ruben. Both of you. Your testimony would corroborate the documents. Show the jury the human cost of what these organizations do. And in exchange, Rubin asked, witness protection, new identities, relocation, financial support to help you start over. Wallace, the prosecutor, spoke for the first time. Her voice was crisp, efficient. You'd be safe. For how long? Stephanie asked. As long as you need. That's not an answer. Wallace's expression didn't change. The truth is, we can't guarantee your safety forever, but we can make it significantly harder for anyone to find you. And once your fathers are convicted, the organizations will fracture. Infighting, power struggles. They'll be too busy destroying each other to come after you. That's a gamble, Rubin said. Everything is. Wallace leaned forward. But it's the best option you have, unless you'd prefer to keep running for the rest of your lives. Stephanie looked at Luca. What about him? He's a minor. He'll go into protective custody until he turns 18. After that, it's his choice whether to stay in the program or leave. Chen's expression softened slightly. We'll take care of him. You have my word. Your word doesn't mean much to me right now. I know, but it's all I can offer. Stephanie looked at Rubin. He met her eyes, and she saw the same exhaustion she felt. The same desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. We need to talk, Rubin said. Alone. Chen nodded. Take your time. Us act. They stepped out into the hallway, leaving Luca with the agents. Marco was leaning against the wall, smoking a cigarette despite the no smoking sign above his head. You're not supposed to do that in here, Stephanie said. I'm not supposed to do a lot of things. Marco took a drag. What are you thinking? I'm thinking this is a trap. It's not. How do you know? Because I set it up. Marco exhaled smoke. I've been working with the feds for 3 months, feeding them information, building the case. The files you stole just accelerated the timeline. Stephanie stared at him. You've been undercover this whole time? Not undercover, just playing both sides. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his heel. Your father was getting reckless, dangerous. I knew it was only a matter of time before he got himself and everyone around him killed. So I made a choice. To betray him. To save the people who still had a chance. Marco looked at her. Including you. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have done exactly what you did anyway. And if your father found out you knew, he would have killed you before the feds could move. Marco's voice was rough. I couldn't risk that. Stephanie felt her anger deflate. You were protecting me. Yeah. Even when you dragged me back from Barcelona. Especially then. If I hadn't, someone else would have, and they wouldn't have been as gentle. Rubin, who'd been silent until now, spoke. What happens to you after this? Marco shrugged. Witness protection, probably. New name, new city, same story as you two. He smiled faintly. Guess we'll all be starting over. Stephanie didn't know what to say, so she stepped forward and hugged him. Marco stiffened, surprised. Then, slowly, he hugged her back. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. They went back into the conference room. We'll testify, Stephanie said. Both of us. Chen nodded. Good. We'll need you to give formal statements today. Depositions will follow. The trial is set to begin in 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Rubin frowned. That's fast. Your fathers waived their right to a speedy trial. They're trying to delay, hoping evidence gets lost or witnesses disappear. We're not giving them that chance. Wallace pulled out a stack of documents. You'll be kept in a safe house until the trial. Separate from each other, for security reasons. No, Stephanie said immediately. Wallace looked up. Excuse me? I said no. We stay together. Ms. Varelli, standard protocol. I don't care about protocol. We stay together or we don't testify. Wallace's jaw tightened. She looked at Chen, who sighed and nodded. Fine, Wallace said. But you follow our rules. No contact with anyone outside the program. No phones, no internet, no exceptions. Agreed. And if either of you compromises the operation, you're out. No second chances. Understood. Wallace gathered the documents. Then let's get started. Marching. The next 6 weeks were a blur of depositions, interviews, and endless repetition. Stephanie told her story so many times the words stopped feeling real. Barcelona. the wedding, the files, the escape. Every detail scrutinized, cross-examined, picked apart. Rubin went through the same process. Sometimes they were questioned together, sometimes separately, always under the watchful eyes of agents who treated them like assets, not people. The safe house was in New Jersey, a two-bedroom apartment in a nondescript complex surrounded by chain-link fences and security cameras. It was clean, functional, and utterly soulless. But it was theirs. At night, when the agents left and the world went quiet, Stephanie and Rubin would sit on the couch and just exist. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes Rubin would play old movies on the TV, black and white films from the 40s and 50s, and Stephanie would fall asleep with her head on his shoulder. It wasn't much, but it was enough. One night, 3 weeks into their confinement, Stephanie woke from a nightmare gasping for air. Rubin was beside her instantly, pulling her into his arms. "It's okay. You're safe. I dream my father found us. She couldn't finish. He didn't. He won't. You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Rubin's voice was steady. "Because I won't let him, and neither will you." Stephanie closed her eyes and let herself believe it. Okay. The trial began on a cold morning in February. The courthouse was a fortress. Barricades, snipers on the roof, armed marshals everywhere. Stephanie and Rubin were brought in through a side entrance, flanked by agents, and ushered into a private room to wait. Luca was already there. He'd grown taller in the last 6 weeks, his face leaner, older. But when he saw Stefani, he smiled. "You ready?" he asked. "No." "Me neither." They sat together, not speaking, until Agent Chen came to get them. Time to go. The courtroom was massive, rows of wooden benches, a high ceiling, an American flag hanging behind the judge's bench, and at the defense table, flanked by lawyers in expensive suits, sat Adriano Varelli and Antonio de Castro. Stephanie's father looked thinner, grayer, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, utterly devoid of remorse. When he saw her, he didn't react, didn't smile, didn't frown, just stared like she was a problem he was still trying to solve. Rubin's father was worse. He glared at Rubin with open hatred, his hands clenched into fists on the table. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, called the court to order. The prosecution gave their opening statement, then the defense, and then, finally, Wallace called her first witness. The United States calls Stefani Varelli to the stand. Stephanie stood. Her legs were shaking, but she forced them to move. She walked to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, though she didn't believe in what it represented, and swore to tell the truth. The courtroom was silent. Wallace approached. "Ms. Varelli, can you state your relationship to the defendant, Adriano Varelli?" "He's my father." "And can you describe in your own words the events that led you to cooperate with this investigation?" Stephanie took a breath. Then she started talking. She told them everything. Barcelona, the arrangement, the lies, the files, the contingency plan to kill Rubin, the escape. She told them about the wedding that never happened, about climbing out a window in a torn dress, about running until her feet bled. She told them about her father's business, the shipments, the bribes, the murders disguised as accidents. And through it all, Adriano sat motionless, his expression never changing. When Stephanie finished, Wallace asked one final question. "Ms. Varelli, do you fear your father?" Stephanie looked directly at Adriano. "I used to, but not anymore." "Why not?" "Because he doesn't own me. He never did, and he never will." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged her gavel. "Order!" Stephanie stepped down from the stand, her heart pounding, and returned to her seat. Rubin was next. His testimony was colder, more clinical. He detailed his family's operations with the precision of someone who'd been trained to run them. Every deal, every alliance, every betrayal. When he finished, his father stood and shouted, "You're a disgrace, a coward!" The judge banged her gavel again. "Mr. de Castro, sit down or you'll be removed from this courtroom." Antonio sat, seething. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Witness after witness, document after document. The evidence was overwhelming. And when the jury returned with their verdict, it took them less than 4 hours to decide. Guilty. On all counts. both men. Adriano's face didn't change. Antonio cursed and had to be restrained by the marshals. Stephanie sat in the gallery, Ruben's hand in hers, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Relief. Okay. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Adriano Varelli was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Antonio de Castro received the same. It was over. Outside the courthouse, Stephanie stood on the steps and breathed in the cold February air. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but she didn't hear any of it. Ruben was beside her, Luca on her other side, Marco somewhere in the crowd, already disappearing into his new life. "What happens now?" Luca asked. Stephanie looked at him. "We start over." "Where?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere safe." She squeezed his hand. "Somewhere we can just be normal." Luca smiled. "I'd like that." Agent Chen approached. "Your transport's ready. New identities are waiting. We've set you up in Oregon. Small town. Low profile." "Oregon," Ruben repeated. "Never been." "Neither have I," Stephanie said. "Guess we'll figure it out together." They walked down the courthouse steps, past the cameras, past the reporters, past the remnants of the lives they used to live. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Stephanie felt free. 8 months later, Portland, Oregon. The apartment was small but bright. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that overlooked the street, furniture they'd picked out themselves from a second-hand store. Stephanie stood at the counter, making coffee, watching the rain streak down the glass. It rained a lot in Portland. She liked it. Ruben came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. His scar had healed into a thin white line on his ribs. Some mornings she traced it with her fingers, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. "Morning," he murmured into her hair. "Morning. Sleep okay?" "Better than usual." He kissed the side of her neck. "Good." Luca shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, and grabbed a bowl for cereal. He was starting his senior year of high school in a few weeks. He'd made friends, joined the soccer team, started talking about college. He was healing. They all were. "I've got a shift at the bookstore later," Stephanie said. "You?" "Meeting with the contractor. They're finalizing the lease for the space downtown." Ruben had started a consulting firm, legitimate, above board, nothing like the business he'd left behind. It was small, it was slow, but it was his. "You nervous?" she asked. "Terrified." "Good. That means it matters." He smiled. "Yeah." They finished breakfast together, the 3 of them, in the quiet morning light. No security, no guards, no one watching. Just a normal family, or as close to normal as they'd ever get. Later that afternoon, Stephanie walked to the bookstore where she worked. It was a small shop tucked between a coffee roaster and a vintage clothing store. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Diane, didn't ask questions about Stephanie's past, just gave her a job and let her be. Stephanie was shelving books in the fiction section when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up. A man walked in, tall, dark coat, familiar in a way that made her stomach drop. For a split second, she thought it was one of her father's men. Then the man turned and she saw it was just a customer, a stranger. She exhaled slowly and went back to shelving. But the fear lingered. It always did. Some nights she still dreamed of her father, of the wedding, of running until her lungs gave out. Some nights Ruben woke up screaming, convinced his family had found them. But those nights were getting fewer, farther apart. And in between, there was life. Real, messy, ordinary life. That evening, Stephanie and Ruben cooked dinners together. Pasta with marinara sauce, nothing fancy. Luca set the table. They ate and talked about nothing important. School, work, the rain. After dinner, Luca went to his room to finish homework. Stephanie and Ruben sat on the couch, a blanket thrown over their legs, watching the city lights flicker through the window. "Do you ever regret it?" Ruben asked quietly. "Which part?" "All of it. Testifying, running, starting over." Stephanie thought about it. About the life she'd left behind, the money, the status, the carefully constructed lie of safety. No, she said, I don't. Even knowing what it cost? Especially knowing that? She turned to look at him. We lost everything, but we found something better. What's that? Each other, and the choice to decide who we want to be. She took his hand. I'd make the same choice again, every time. Reuben pulled her closer, resting his chin on top of her head. Me too. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and the quiet certainty that they'd survived. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but alive. 2 years later, the house was small, a craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street in the suburbs of Portland. It had a porch, a yard, room for a garden Stephanie was trying, and mostly failing, to cultivate. It was theirs. Luca had left for college the year before, University of Washington, studying engineering. He called every Sunday, sometimes more. Stephanie worked at a nonprofit now, helping victims of organized crime find resources and rebuild their lives. It was hard work, emotionally draining, but it mattered. Reuben's consulting firm had grown. He had employees, clients, a reputation for being fair and ruthlessly efficient. They were building something, slowly, carefully. One evening in late spring, Stephanie came home to find Reuben on the porch, holding a small velvet box. Her heart stopped. What's that? What does it look like? He smiled, nervous in a way she rarely saw. I know we already did this once, sort of, but that wasn't real. That was them deciding for us. He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, gold, no diamonds, understated. This is me asking. No arrangements, no deals, just us. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears. Reuben, marry me, for real this time. Because I choose you, and I want to keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life. She didn't hesitate. Yes. He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Luca was there. Marco, living under a new name in Montana, sent flowers. Agent Chen sent a card that said simply, "Congratulations. Stay safe." There was no reception, no guests, no elaborate dress or strategic alliances. Just two people who'd fought their way out of hell, standing in front of a judge, promising to love each other in a world that had tried everything to keep them apart. And when the judge said, "You may kiss," Stephanie kissed Reuben like it was the first time, like it was the last time, like it was the only thing that mattered, because it was. 5 years later, Stephanie stood in the kitchen of their house, watching the sunrise over the backyard, coffee in hand, hair tied back, barefoot. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. A little girl, 3 years old, with Reuben's dark hair and Stephanie's stubborn chin, padded into the room, dragging a stuffed rabbit behind her. "Mama, hungry!" Stephanie smiled and scooped her up. "Pancakes? Pancakes!" Reuben appeared a moment later, equally disheveled, equally content. He kissed Stephanie's temple and ruffled their daughter's hair. "Morning, troublemaker." "Papa!" She giggled and reached for him. They made breakfast together, the three of them, in the warm morning light. And as Stephanie watched her daughter laugh and Reuben flip pancakes with the kind of ease that came from practice, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of fear, not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. Love, family, home. Things she'd once thought were impossible. Things she'd fought for, bled for, survived for. And now, finally, they were hers. Later that afternoon, Stephanie drove to the cemetery on the outskirts of town. It was a quiet place shaded by old oak trees with rows of simple headstones. She stopped at one near the back. Marco Santini, beloved friend and protector. Gone too soon. He died the year before. Heart attack. Quick, painless, the doctors said. Stephanie didn't know if that was true, but she hoped it was. She set a bouquet of flowers on the grave and crouched down, running her fingers over the engraved letters. "I wish you could have met her," she said quietly. "Our daughter. You would have liked her. She's stubborn, brave, doesn't take no for an answer." Stephanie smiled. "Kind of like me." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a bird sang. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. She stayed a few more minutes. Then she stood and walked back to her car, carrying the weight of gratitude and grief in equal measure. That night, after their daughter was asleep, Stephanie and Reuben sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the yard. Do you ever think about them? Reuben asked. Our fathers, what they're doing? Sometimes. Stephanie leaned against him. But not as much as I used to. Me neither. They'd heard through the grapevine that Adriano had died in prison 2 years ago, shanked by another inmate, quick, violent, the way he'd lived. Stephanie hadn't cried when she found out, hadn't felt much of anything, just a dull, distant ache, and then nothing. Reuben's father was still alive, as far as they knew, still serving his sentence, still bitter, but that was his prison, not theirs. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never met? Stefani asked. All the time. And I think I'd be miserable, pretending to be someone I'm not, living a life I never wanted. Reuben turned to look at her. You saved me, Stephanie. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me too. Then I guess we're even. Not even close. She kissed him. But we've got time to figure it out. They sat together until the fireflies faded and the stars came out. And in the quiet dark, Stephanie thought about how far they'd come. From the edge of a candlelit aisle, in a wedding dress she never chose, to this, a porch in Portland, a family she'd built, a life she'd earned. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. And for the first time in her life, Stephanie Virelli wasn't running. She was home. Epilogue. Years later, when their daughter was old enough to ask questions, Stephanie would tell her the truth. Not all of it, not the darkest parts, but enough. She would tell her about a girl who ran from a life she didn't choose, about a man who helped her fight back, about the courage it took to burn everything down and start over. She would tell her that freedom wasn't free, that it cost blood and tears and everything you thought you couldn't live without. But it was worth it. Every scar, every nightmare, every terrifying, beautiful moment, because in the end, the only life worth living was the one you chose for yourself. And Stephanie had chosen this. A quiet house, a loving partner, a daughter who would grow up free from the shadows that had haunted her mother. This was the victory, not the trial, not the verdict, not the headlines that faded after a few weeks. This, the morning coffee, the bedtime stories, the ordinary, extraordinary miracle of waking up safe. Stephanie stood in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching her sleep, and felt the weight of everything she'd survived settle into something softer. Gratitude. For Reuben, who'd stood beside her when running would have been easier. For Luca, who'd forgiven her for the chaos she'd brought into his life. For Marco, who'd protected her even when she didn't know she needed it. For every choice that had led her here. She turned off the light and walked back down the hall, where Reuben was waiting. She asleep? He asked. Finally. He pulled her close, and they stood there in the quiet house, wrapped in each other, and the life they'd built from the ashes of the old one. Outside, the world kept turning. People kept fighting. Empires kept rising and falling. But inside, in this small house on a tree-lined street, there was only peace. And Stephanie Virelli, once a prisoner of her father's empire, once a bride in a wedding she never wanted, was finally, completely, irrevocably free.